guys know what peer review means? Anybody here know what it means to have a peer review?
Yeah.
What's it mean to have a peer review? Answer for you.
It's basically, or at least the way our school does it, we have people like almost like a gallery walk and like sheets of paper tell us what they think about it, but the teachers like yell at students, or like not necessarily like.
So in practical, like when it comes to like, because what Pastor Daniel was saying, money motivates a lot of these studies, right? And these studies, before they can be published and declared as valid, they have to take that information they collected and then give it to a group of people who also study something similar and say, were the methods used considered standard, and were the methodology of the study, is it the integrity maintained? And the problem is everybody looks through the same lens. So they don't necessarily look at the intent of the study objectively. They already kind of have a bias in their mind about, there's already presupposed assumptions about the methods they're using. So
they absolutely believe
that carbon dating, despite we knowing have its faults, they just accept that fault intrinsically and then say it's now valid.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful with a lot of this stuff when it's proposed to you.
Created ways, new standards of how you do your science that sort of put a Band-Aid over the problems that come up, and they help you to not notice.
Right.
So with radiometric dating, when you test something to see how old it is, what you're really doing is you're measuring how much of some isotope exists in that substance, be it a rock or a fossil or whatever it is. They had a lot of complaints from people like this guy who said, hey, I'm going to send you 10 samples. And he lies to them and he says they're from 10 different rock layers. And he sends them in and he gets 10 different dates on those samples because he said they were from different rock layers. And then he'll send them 10 more samples. He says, oh, okay, here's 10 samples from the same rock layer. And they'll test it and they'll all come back with a similar date. But then secretly, all 20 pieces were from the same rock. So he messes with them. And he says, tell me the date. So this happened again and again and again, where they could basically manufacture any date they wanted by changing how they run the tests. They could make a date pop out. When that was revealed, they invented a new system where you have to do the same test 20, 30 times. And you have to take the average of all the tests and plot it on a curve. And you create what they call an isochron. And so you can basically say, well, our guess is really, really good. But the flip side of that is, it means anyone who wants to game you, they have to pay 20 times as much for every test.
And they're frame biasing. That's what you guys need to learn. So you'll learn that.
Yeah, Danny.
Why don't we do topic night during the normal times?
I would like to, but I was told not to by my boss. So I'm not.
Why? How is it not different?
They want church when any random person might come in who's like a new person, and they're just like walking into church because we have our hours posted on the website, to come in and find like a normal church service, not our topic night where we're just sitting here talking about evolution. So that's pretty much it, and that's a decent reason. I don't disagree. I just also know that not everyone can make it at 4 o'clock, and that's like hard on people.
Also, is that guy good or bad?
This guy?
Yeah.
He's good. Yeah, Krista.
So, if people believe in evolution, why do they use like BCE or BC?
Well, so the BCE is before Common Era, right?
Oh.
It's no longer before Christ.
Oh.
That's why they changed it. Yeah, and now AD is Common Era. But they changed it again. I kid you not, there's a third one. I can't even remember now that they changed it again. So
ABCD?
it's all silly nonsense. It's all silly nonsense. They just want to get rid of any sort of religious aspect within our systems, whether it be our scientific systems, our scholastic systems, our governmental systems. They just want to get rid of it. And I get it to some degree because they think being secular is the most fair thing you can be. Does that make sense? That's what they think. And so they really do believe it's more fair to the Muslims, it's more fair to the Jewish people, it's more fair to whatever other religion you can think of, Buddhists, to have no Christianity in our establishments, even though that's where our establishments came from, was mostly Christians. But it's not really the point. The point is we're meant to follow Christ, and if we want to see a change like that, we shouldn't fight that. We should try and bring Christ to more people. That'll change on its own. That'll just get fixed on its own. Okay, so a few questions I'm curious if you guys know the answers to. How do we know how old the Earth is? Yes.
The layers in the rocks.
The layers in the rocks. Okay, so this is a curious one to stop and think about. How do we now know how old the layers are?
We don't.
Well, there's more to it than that.
Well, it's just like how fossils are kind of made, and like if you go out to the lake, you'll find like rocks that have like different layers,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and like
So how
I
do you
don't wanna
turn icy layers into age? Do you get it? Like, that's the real question.
yeah,
How do you turn a layer to a year, or a day, or a month, or 1,000 years?
like so if you go to a lake and it's like really how long ago did the lake start?
How do you know how long ago the lake started?
Magic.
This is important to think about. I don't mean to back you into a corner, but I know the answer to the question. The layers were discovered with no ages attached. They're just undated. They are layers. The layers exist. And someone put forth a theory. And the theory was that each layer you can see with your eyes is equivalent to a year. That was the theory. So I can see it with my eyes. It looks like a stripe. That's a year. So if I count the stripes, I'll get the number of years. Well, that didn't give a big enough number to account for evolution. And so that number started out as the best guess of geologists, a layer's a year, right? You see that with trees, you see it in other natural systems where the weather changes in a cycle, so you see coloration of things in a cycle. Where, this season leaves this color stain on something, and then this season leaves this color stain on something. When the year goes around again, you see the same colors come back through. So you would expect the pattern to repeat every single year. So that was the geologist's best guess. But when they started pushing forth evolution as the leading theory, there wasn't enough layers. They needed billions of years, and they were only getting high thousands. Some people, depending on how you look at them, because that's the thing, is it's subjective. A layer I can see. Well, is it I can see with a microscope? Or is it I can see with my naked eye? Or is it, I can see from far away? Like, what layer are we considering a layer? So they started inventing new ways to count the layers because they needed bigger and bigger numbers. Once they had the number they liked, then they said, okay, so now, based on where it is in the layer count, if I find a fossil there, then that's how old the fossil is. The fossil formed that many years ago. I'll just count down the layers. Boom. Right? That makes sense. If it's this deep, it's that old. And then you keep going, and eventually they start saying, we find these fish, let's just pick a species of fish, this many years back. That's what we find. We find this fish this many years back. Well, they did that before they did all the digging. They did that when they had done a little digging. And they kept doing it. We find this lizard this many years back. So they'll just put a number next to that lizard, and they'll say this lizard's 70 million years old, this fish is 110 million years old, this is this many millions of years old. And then when they find it in another layer, they'll say, that layer's this old. But now you have a little circle going on. I counted the layers, and now I found out how old the fossil is. And now I can look anywhere for that fossil, and I can say that's how old the layer is. And they only needed to do that because the layers are not perfectly contiguous. Almost every single layer of soil we have has a patch somewhere on the earth where it doesn't exist. Where all these layers are laid out, they actually cover whole continents, but they don't cover the whole continent. Does that make sense? There's always a little patch here, a patch there, a stripe here where that layer just isn't deposited. So sometimes you find it as like an island, almost. You're out in the middle of the desert and you keep digging down and you find there is this layer again that I have over on the other coast of the continent, and there's nothing touching. This layer doesn't make it all the way to the continent, but it's here. I think it's the same. I found my fish. It must be the same layer. I'm not saying it's not, but then they're saying that therefore it's the same age. Even though it's not the same number of layers down from the top, they'll say it's the same age. And that to me doesn't sound like good logic. Okay, Ansel.
My answer to the question was, in the Bible, I think it was from creation to Abraham was about 2,000 years,
Mm-hmm.
and then from Abraham to something else was 4,000 years, and that added together is 6,000. So it's about 6,000 years or something like that.
Yeah. So it's like Adam to Abraham is about 2,000. Abraham to Jesus is about 2,000. Jesus to us is about 2,000. Yeah, roughly. So you just count up the genealogies. By the time you get to Jesus, you don't even have to try and count the years to us because they were already using dating systems that we can track at that point. So the other thing that's funny is the Jews were actually using their ancient calendar up until about 300 AD. and their calendar counts from creation forward. So they don't have their years as, Jesus is the 0 and go this way and it's BC and go this way and it's 80. They don't do that. They just literally count up from creation. I disagree with them. I think they messed it up a little bit. That their accounting isn't far off from what I think it is. I'm going off what the Bible says. They're going off of memory handed down from father to son, father to son, father to son, father to son. So, but yeah, they're within the same range. I think we're in like 5,000 and high change right now on the Jewish calendar, whereas I would say we're 6,025 years from creation. Yeah, Danny.
Are the layers in a tree, is that a theory or is that?
Oh no, we can repeat that. That's actually easy to test. This is actually the problem. If you take a tree and plant it, and you know the date you planted it, and then you cut it down 20 years later, and you count the rings, you'll find 20 rings. There's no problem with that. But the reason we can be sure about it is for the very simple reason that you can repeat the test. That's it, you can repeat the test. The problem with checking lake deposits is you can't repeat the test going back thousands or millions of years. On top of that, if a flood has ever occurred in the area, you can't repeat the flood. So if anything changes the way the water works in that area, you're stuck. You can't repeat it. The only thing you could repeat is how many layers are formed under normal circumstances. I will wait 20 years to see what the lake does, and I'll write a paper at the end of the 20 years and say, here's what happened in 20 years. But that only tells you about normal processes, and it's the same with trees. You can take a tree and plant it and then mess with it. You can just wreak havoc on that tree, do things to that tree, poison that tree, cut that tree, and 20 years later you will not find 20 rings. You'll find like 25, 30, 40 rings. So what you're seeing when you repeat the test within human lifespans is, what does normalcy get you? And the question is, has everything always been normal all of the time? And if you see other evidence that aren't the clock evidences, you see other evidence that shows you it was not normal the whole time, then you have to account for that. You have to figure out, what do trees do when you mess with them? What do lakes do when they flood? You have to figure out those things and apply it to the clocks that we're trying to dig up. So here's a few clocks for you. These are 101 different clocks. I keep pressing the laser button when I want to press the mouse button. Oh my gosh, dude. Brain. Please, brain. It's a big slide. There we go. So I don't know if you guys can read this. It's pretty small because it's 101 of them. We find working DNA that you can pull out and read in ancient fossils that are supposedly millions of years old. We dug up Lazarus bacteria that was down with the millions of year old fossils, and it came back to life. It was in stasis. Some bacteria has that ability. They can go into like low metabolic rate and just like sit in stasis for a while. It's like sleep. But this bacteria actually just like came back alive. The decay in the human genome due to multiple slightly deleterious mutations each generation is consistent with an origin of several thousand years ago.
Are you gonna read all of these?
No, I can't go that fast. But you
Okay.
can if you want. And I'll print it off for you if you want. There's a website too. It's right up here. creation.com/age-of-the-earth. I think it's actually all lowercase. No, that's just the font. But you can keep going through these. These are all different clocks that have nothing to do with each other, most of them. They don't rely on each other. And if you trace these clocks backwards and see how far back does this clock run, they don't give you millions of years. They give you thousands of years. Some of these are tracing the human population. So it's a clock on the human population. Some of these are tracing geologic formation. So they're tracing the actual movement of the tectonic plates. Some of these are tracing stellar bodies. So the moon, the sun, shapes of different orbits. So it's showing you the age of the solar system. The interesting thing is, they all line up with similar years. They all line up around that 6,000 to 10,000 year range. Showing not necessarily the Bible must be true. That would be a little silly to say it that way. But showing millions of years isn't true. And so that's really the bigger question, is if all of the evidence is pointing to a young Earth, a young solar system, a young human population, a young animal population, then would there have been time for evolution to even occur? Even supposing evolution were possible, would there be time for everything to evolve from a bacterium up to humans? If the clocks on how long everything's been around all sync up, that's another problem too, which is if human generations go back to the beginning of the counting, and so do all the other animals, and so do the rocks on this planet, and so does our solar system, then there's no time for evolution because we were there at the beginning. That's a big problem. If you were going to give evolution a shot, you would have to find that the Earth and other animals were here before, long before humans were here. Long enough for animals to turn into humans. But that's not what we find. We find that all the different clocks all sync up, going back the same distance. Yeah, Abby.
So at our school, we were taught that like whales could have had like limbs.
Yeah.
Because they were originally like land animals and developed over like some like weird dog-looking thing.
Yeah.
And over time, they
I've actually got a video about that on the slides.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. But we were taught that it took like millions of years to eventually evolve into like these gigantic whales who live in water. But it doesn't really make sense if you're talking about how creation was like 6,000 years ago or something.
It's exactly right, but the whale thing is even worse than that, because the whale thing is invented by someone who wants it to be invented. It's not invented by the evidence. You can't look at the evidence and come up with the whale theory. You have to want it to be true before you get there. The reason is, when we actually got the whole fossil for some of those in-between species, okay, so not the one that everyone says is fully a land creature and not the whale, but some of the in-between species, when you go look at their fossils, the whole theory was invented when all we had was a skull. Think about that for a second. The theory was invented that there were in-between species that were half land, half water creature, when we didn't even have the entire fossil. We just had a skull. That tells you the theory was invented before we had the evidence. We had whales, we had mammals that lived on land, and we had a skull, and someone said, it evolved like this. Well, then we keep finding the fossils, and what do we find? Well, that skull belongs to a creature that's fully a land animal. It wasn't aquatic. And then you keep going, and the one that's like the 3/4 mark, so it's mostly a whale, it's a land animal who likes to swim. It's like a sea otter.
Or hippo.
Yeah, exactly. They can hold their breath for a bit, but they can't live underwater. They don't have the blubber. They don't have any of the things that whales have. Plus, the theory started off from what whales have as around their hips. Have you guys ever seen the skeleton of a whale?
Yeah.
You go to Monterey Bay Aquarium, they got some massive ones up on the ceiling. It's really cool. Around whales' hips, they have these little tiny bones that look like similar to if you just chopped your femur in half and you just had the top part down like a stick. It just ends all of a sudden. So whales have this down on their lower half, and they've got these big long flippers, right? Those bones were thought to be a vestigial leg because they look like a vestigial leg. But no one found any evidence that they were a vestigial leg. Vestigial just means an organ that's left over from prior evolution and yet is still there, even though it serves no purpose. Well, lo and behold, it serves a good purpose. Whales are the biggest creature on the planet that gives birth to live young. And they do it underwater. Think about that for a second. A live baby whale living inside of its mother's womb in liquid could come out into the ocean in liquid. What if the baby doesn't want to go? How long can it last in the womb? Like as long as it wants. Like until it grows to the point where it just like starts hurting the mom, right? Because it doesn't need to leave. It could just live up in there. And so the whales have these bones that, no joke, are like the little things at the bottom of the pinball machine. That's what they do. They're on the back of the womb, and when the whale's ready to get rid of that baby, the mama can just go poof and just punch the baby out. Just get out of there. That's what they're for. And so, lo and behold, the males have smaller ones than the females. You know, like most mammalian species, the males and the females have the same body parts, but growing at different rates and in different ways, rather than one just like not having it. That'd be like males not having legs or something. Like that's just weird. That's not how our DNA works. It's not how bodies work. So with whales, they've got baby poppers just like sitting in there, and then scientists see it and they don't know what it's for because they've never watched a whale give birth, and so they just think it's a leg. But there's no evidence of that. It's just a guess. It's just a theory. Yeah.
Another thing too is a lot of the disciplines of science, they're broken up into different groups. So you have like physical science, and then you have geologists, and then you have chemists, and then in biology, you have your life science, you have biology and cellular chemists or biological chemists. and they don't even agree on the dates. So just think of that, these large scientific data.
Yep.
So in biology,
The three bright blue stars.
in biology, if you use the theory of evolution, there isn't enough time for all of the iterations of evolution. So their clock is substantially larger than a lot of physical sciences clocks, because they don't fit.
It happens even in geology and archaeology.
Right.
Where, some geologist is saying this rock is X old, and an archaeologist comes along and says, no, it's not. It's next to a piece of pottery from this dynasty.
Yeah.
It can't be that old. Like, what are you
Right.
talking about?
Yeah.
So,
But they just glazed over that. Like, so it's going to be taught to you as fact. So you're going to go to these classes and get books that have absolutely conflicting dates and data points, and you're just kind of told to accept that.
because the expert said so?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it was written down in a book.
It was written down in a book. Woohoo! All right, so let's skip this one. This is about blue stars. Blue stars, we've never seen one form.
Ever.
We're looking at all over the sky, we've never seen one form. Yeah.
So, sorry, this is probably going to be another long question,
That's
but
okay.
like, if creation started with Adam and Eve, which
Yeah.
were humans,
Yeah.
which means that like the ape theory isn't really true
Sure.
because they have like the opposable thumbs and are like smart, kind of like humans, but still a little bit stupid.
Yeah. Apes are pretty stupid compared to humans.
It
We
reminded me
never
like,
see them doing surgery.
Yeah.
Not even once.
Would
Not
that
even once.
mean that
They went to
like
space.
dinosaurs aren't real? Because especially if you have
Oh,
humans
no.
that start, yeah.
No. Dinosaurs are absolutely real. They're
Okay.
100% real.
Yeah.
And we actually have evidence that people don't like that humans saw dinosaurs.
Mhm.
We have ancient carvings made by ancient humans from thousands of years ago of dinosaurs. So they clearly had seen dinosaurs. And the carvings and some of the drawings are in the same context as all the other animals. So you've got like a deer, you've got like a rhinoceros, and then you've got like a brontosaurus, and they're all just like side by side.
Mhm.
So to the ancient humans, these were all just animals. They didn't think of them differently. But after the flood, you get a giant ice age. And humongous reptiles don't work real well in an ice age.
Mhm.
So they die off, and most modern humans sort of forget about dinosaurs. They're left around in myths and legends like dragons. So people still talk about these ancient giant lizards, but they think they're fake because they've never seen them. Once you get into like, dark ages and beyond, no one living at that point had seen one. So it's just an idea of a giant lizard. It continued to live in the human consciousness through the generations. So then you get to modern era and we dig up the bones to something that looks like a dragon, except it doesn't have all the features of the mythological dragon.
Yeah.
And we go, oh, we figured out something brand new that no one's ever seen before. But that's dinosaurs. Like these things are very well documented, but no one wants to listen to that because it fights the whole rest of the paradigm. To say that dinosaurs and humans live side by side. They did. We've got the evidence. Ancient people knew precisely what they looked like. And they didn't draw dinosaur bones. Does that make sense? They didn't draw a skeleton of Stegosaurus. They drew a living Stegosaurus. They carved, a living Stegosaurus. They drew a living Brontosaurus. They didn't draw Brontosaurus bones. So these people really did see dinosaurs. Yeah.
If we evolved from apes,
Yeah.
then why are apes still apes?
That's a really good question. The answer is you asked the question wrong. Scientists do not suppose we evolved from apes. They suppose we evolved from an ancestor of apes. Does that make any sense or any difference at all to you? Not really? Okay,
Like
so
we and
imagine the
apes
family
now.
tree. Apes now, humans now, go back in time. At some point we had a shared grandpa, so to speak. Great grandpa. But he wasn't an ape and he wasn't a human. That's the theory. He was something else, in betweenish, between an ape and a human. Does that kind of make sense? And when the evolution continued, somewhere in these jungly, you need to climb a tree to live environments, they evolved into apes. Somewhere in these more forested desert climates where you needed to build tools, you need to be clever to find your food or else you're just going to starve to death, they evolved into humans. That's actually the theory. Not apes have always existed and we just popped off from apes. That's not the theory. Does that kind of make sense? So you find the apes in these hugely jungly environments, and then anthropology actually backs this half of the theory up, that humans weren't in those jungle environments very, very far back. They migrated into those jungle environments over time. So that part at least tracks. And we're actually doing a lot of research right now in Northern American populations using Y chromosomal DNA to figure out how the family lines spread and who went where and who came from who. And the next thing on the docket is South American family lines. So we're really hopeful that if we can get that DNA, we can start to piece together when humans made it to South America and from where, and who intermarried with who, and which cultures tie to the Mayans and which ones tie to the Aztecs, and figure all that stuff out. We're just getting that research done right now with Native Americans in Northern America, and the fruit of that research is mind-boggling. It's very possible, if you look at the histories of the Native American peoples and you match it with the DNA evidence, that Native Americans who stayed in North America, not the South American ones, who stayed in North America only got there a couple years before Leif Erikson did. It looks like all people that were in North America prior to Leif Erikson by a big shot moved to South America. And that North America was just empty for the next batch of people to come over from Russia and go through North America and settle it. And so the Native Americans were only there, around 1000 AD, maybe 900 AD, not BC. It's kind of crazy, but the DNA and their own written and oral histories match that really well. That's what the evidence leads us to. So it's modern research right now. It's all subject to change if they find one more piece of evidence. It's all very fresh. Yeah, Krista.
So I was looking at this question.
Yeah.
Then I realized, wait, if God created everything at the same time,
Yeah.
how are we all confused on how old the universe is?
So if it was, say, 6,000 years ago, or if it was 20 million years ago, who would remember? They'd all be dead, right? Yeah. So that's really the trick. No one alive today was there except for God. So you can either take his word for it, or you can look for some evidence that pushes you in one direction or the other, or you can look for a written record, look for the oldest history you can find, see what that says. The two oldest histories we have are the ones that come from Buddha, which is not as old as the Bible, and the Bible. Those are the two oldest ones. And when you look in the Bible, it gives you dates by tying human lifespans with years attached to big giant events that we can figure out. So it does that really, really well. When you look at the Buddhist records, it basically says the earth has always existed, it's never not existed, it's lasted in eternity forever, in an infinite backward stretch, and every few thousand years a new Buddha comes. And everyone forgets about it, and then they send a new Buddha, whoever they are. So that's the Buddhist record. Those are the two oldest records we have. Either it's infinite, which there's not enough gravestones if that's the case, or it was 6,000 years ago. Take your pick. Those are the two human records. Yeah. Victoria?
Oh, okay, so my question might not make sense, but if God created a whole bunch of other animals and some randomly become extinct,
Yeah.
how do we know, okay, this might not make sense, but
No, that's okay.
some animals can be created by scientists. How do we know they are created by scientists or created by God?
Okay, so when you say created, do you mean invented, like they
Not invented.
imagined it and they're just pretending it exists? Or do you mean created like they have actually made a new living being out of nothing?
Making a new living being out of
What can they make out of nothing?
I have no idea, but
The answer is nothing.
yeah, exactly. So
Okay,
my
so what
question
kind of
is-
new being are you thinking of?
I don't know.
Okay, so I'll give you the list of what scientists can really do. They can take a dead cell and leave it sitting dead. Currently, they don't know how to take a dead cell and bring it back to life, which is pretty problematic because they're claiming that some soup a few million years ago of chemicals was hit with some kind of energy, fire, lightning, something, and it turned into living matter. But they can't take a dead cell with 100% of all the pieces needed to be alive and make it live. That's a big problem. Because if you can't do it in a lab with 100% of all the pieces already pre-assembled, then how do you make unassembled chemicals assemble and then come to life too? Doesn't work. Next, what they can do is they can clone. So they can take an egg from a living creature, they harvest it, which is a weird, creepy process all in its own, but they take that egg and they give it modified sperm that has the DNA from the same mom that they got the egg from, so that now the sperm and the egg create a new creature with the exact same genetic code as the mom. And then they reimplant it back in the mom, and the mom raises it in her womb, and now the baby pops out and it's got the same DNA as the mom. But they didn't make the sperm, they didn't make the egg, and they didn't raise the impregnated egg to a living creature. They had to stick it back in an animal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They couldn't even like make a test tube to make a baby. So they did start doing some modern tests on, can we fake womb it? Can we make like an artificial womb that's not from an animal? It's purely lab womb. And they've done a few tests on this, they've run it through a few times, and what they get is sickly, deformed, mutant-looking things that never last very long. They die almost immediately. It's gross. It's serious like nightmare fuel. Do not go look up the photos, it's awful. Okay? This is the best we can do in the lab right now, is make some mush with an eyeball in it. You know what I mean? Like, it's bad. It's really bad. Now they might keep going. I mean, science is ridiculous. We keep making microchips that keep getting smaller to the point where we're dealing with the problem between atoms, like atoms just phasing through each other. Like that's how small we're making things. So eventually, yeah, maybe we'll make a fake womb that actually works. I don't think that proves anything though, because if that's what scientists have to do to create life, then it just proves all the more that you can't get life out of non-life. You can't get life out of an empty universe, or a hot universe, or a cold universe, or billions of years in an empty random universe. You need someone to come along who knows what they're doing to make life. That's what they're proving for us, kind of by accident. Only God's better at it than they are. So that's really what scientists can do. They cannot create a new creature. They can do hybridization, you know, the tiger and the lion, get them to have a baby, you know, like, whoop-de-doo. The tiger already existed, the lion already existed. You scientists did nothing but lock two creatures that hate each other in a cage. Like, congratulations. That's not clever, right? That's not inventing a new creature. Yeah, Abby.
Oh, so basically, if humans, like, God made humans and put them on Earth, he made the two humans and then, like, boom, people.
Yeah.
And then would that mean animals come, like, after them, or,
Good question.
like...
Really good question. Does anyone here remember the days of creation? Separate question, you can put your hand down for a second. Anyone know the days of creation? On day one, God created... Yep, and he said, let there be lights. Woo, cool. Okay, and then on day two, God separated the... No, that comes later. You're close.
The light.
And the land from the darkness.
Oh, the waters from the firmament.
It's the waters in the firmament.
Oh,
So he creates like an atmosphere. He stretches out this cold, wet rock so that now there's actually air and there's clouds and there's all these layers of atmosphere. Because, and this is interesting when you think about ancient people wrote this down, right? Moses writes this stuff down at the very beginning of written alphabetic language. He is probably one of the very first alphabet users on the planet when he writes this stuff down. It is that old. And he writes down, one of the days of creation is the atmosphere getting created. I'm willing to bet some good money that most civilizations in his era did not understand the importance of an atmosphere. Does that make sense? They did not understand the science of UV rays coming and giving people cancer. They did not understand the science of, if you keep going up, the atmosphere gets thinner and thinner and thinner, so you need it stretched pretty far out if you want it to work well at all different elevations, because some mountains are taller than other places, right? He doesn't get that, and yet he gives a whole day of creation to God made the atmosphere. A whole day of creation. That is not something an ancient cave dweller would do. That doesn't even make sense to an ancient cave dweller. You would have to just be told by an omnipotent God, yeah, I had to spend a whole day on the atmosphere. It's big work. For him to actually write that down, because it doesn't make sense otherwise. Then you get to day 3, day 4, day 5. So day 4 and 5 and 6 are plants, water and air creatures, and then land creatures. Does that make sense? So 4 plants, 5 water and flying, birds basically. And then you get to 6 and you got land creatures. And on day 6, with the land creatures, you also get Adam. Does that make sense? So, yes, when the humans were made, animals already existed. They were all either made the day before or the same day. Just depends on which kind of animal. Was there more to that?
Yeah.
So what's the follow through?
So basically, like, I don't really know how to explain it really, but
That's fine.
Found it again. So basically, Noah's Ark happened, and then like the huge flood happened, which basically like totally wiped out like these huge giant plants, and they become like vestigial, and like they just like die.
A lot of plants just die. But the
Yeah.
beautiful thing about plants is you don't need the whole plant to survive.
Yeah.
You just gotta get that seed to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we find in the fossil record is a lot of plants got buried. We don't find all of their seed pods buried with them.
So
It's mostly stripped trunks, just completely ripped apart, and the seeds just float better. They're just tiny little things. So the plants mostly died. They just happened to let all their seeds go in the flood, so they come back.
And what like real like I don't really know how to explain it, but like the evidence that like the Earth is billions or millions of years old, it doesn't of course match up to what we know in the Bible.
Right.
But
So the problem
Smith
is
evidence.
the evidence we have for an ancient Earth is circular evidence that's relying on the belief that we have an ancient Earth. The evidence that we have a young Earth is just that. It's just plain old evidence. It's just a clock that counts backwards. So one of my favorite ones is that you can actually watch the moon over the years, and we have. We've been enamored with the moon. And as you continue to watch it, you can track it is getting further away every year. Every year it gets further and further away. So then there's a weird question you might think of. How close was it in the past? So if you run that clock backwards, because you can map the distance it's moving every year and the speed you can get from that, you run that speed backwards, and it's a curve, but you can run that curve backwards, and if you go back billions of years, it would be not only touching the planet, it'd be in the center of the planet and out the other side. So the moon can't even have been here for most of the Earth's existence if the Earth is billions of years old. But if you just run it back like 10,000 years, it's fine. It's basically right where we left it, because it's moving so slow. It's not until you work with numbers like a billion that it's a problem. Now you have to explain, how did the Earth function with no seasons from the moon prior to whatever date evolutionists would have to say the moon suddenly arrived from space and just like it swung around the Earth? Because it can't have been here the whole time. It would have been touching us if you keep running that distance algorithm backwards. So a lot of the clocks are like that, where it's not that it couldn't go further back, it's that if it went further back, it'd be a real problem for evolution. One of them is salinity in the ocean. We keep getting more and more salt off the land into the ocean, so the salt levels keep on rising, but that would mean we had like no salt in the past. That would mean like every creature wasn't a salt creature, which would mean bacteria would basically rule the ocean. Everything would just be sick like all the time. These little clocks are just constantly found in nature that say, if you go back far enough, every living thing would die. So then evolution doesn't get its time. Even if the rock we call Earth was here for 13 billion years, it wouldn't be habitable. You couldn't live on it. So it's a little harder to prove that the actual magma core and the rocks on the top weren't here for 13 billion years. Because rocks are just harder to work with like that. We don't actually have access to the magma in the core. We don't have access to the rocks at the bottom of our tectonic plates. It's a little hard to run dates on those things. But all the stuff we care about, oceans, the moon making our seasons happen, all the dirt that's on the top, all the soil layers, we can run tests on those. We can run those as clocks. And they keep telling us they're young. Danny.
So back in the day, back to dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Did they use dinosaurs as like cars, like the Flintstones?
I wish. No, reptiles are like harder to train than most mammals. It's like, even if, there were some chill ones that weren't like super duper rageful like we see in Jurassic Park, it'd still be harder to train them than a mammal. They're just not as easy to train. We just know that from reptiles now. You can train a reptile. It is not the same as training a dog or a cat or any of those guys. Even birds like parrots, we tend to have pretty good experiences with certain creatures, and we just don't see those traits in the fossil record of dinosaurs. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe there's like certain dinosaurs that were like super chill and docile, and they were like farm animals back then. I don't know. I'd love to find that out, get to heaven, and God's like, oh no, man, Brontosaurus was so you could reach up and over the cliff. He was the crane back then, just like in Flintstones. I would think that would be way cool. But the evidence doesn't push us that way. The evidence says, no, they're like Komodo dragons and whatnot. They're just evil. Jurassic Park got that part right, as far as I can tell from Komodo dragons. Like, they just want to see you suffer. They don't like you at all. But, I don't know. I could be surprised. It'd be cool to find out. Yeah, they had, Triceratops cars. That'd be sweet. All right. One more to get the juices flowing. Let's see what this one is. Nope, we skipped it.
class.
Oh, we did skip it. That's right.
So I took a paleontology course, I think is the correct name for it, senior level course a long time ago for teaching certification. And I asked the professor, how much actual evidence, like fossil evidence do we have for human transitional life forms? And it was just a private class, me and him. And he said, well, not really much. I'm wondering, in the time since I took that class to now, are there like hundreds of hundreds of transitional forms that are supposed to come into human beings? Has that now been, shown up? Do we have large masses of stuff that we can look at?
Have you heard of
Okay, so real quick, in case you didn't get that question, we were talking earlier about how we didn't come from apes. That's not even the theory. The theory is that apes and us both came from a common ancestor. That's the theory. That common ancestor is what we call a transitional form. Okay, it's a point in time where you can say it could either go ape or it could go human. It's transitional, right? So his question is, when I was in college, I point blank asked my professor, who's an expert in the field, how many transitional forms do we have for humans? And the professor's answer for him when he was learning to be a teacher in college was, we don't. We don't have any. So now he's asking this expert, same one we saw in the last video, has that changed? Because he went to school a long time ago. He's an older guy now. So he's saying, like, in the last 20 years, in the last 30 years, however many years it's been, have we found the transitional fossils, and how many have we found? So here's the answer.
I took a paleontology course, I think is the correct name for it, senior level course a long time ago for teaching certification. So possible, is that now been stuff that we can look at?
Have you heard of Australopithecus sediba?
I have not.
So when you asked your professor that question, this sediba wasn't around.
Correct.
So this is Lee Berger, the famous from South Africa paleoanthropologist. He said, look, I've got two specimens of these, and they were also from jumbled bone pits. And so look, it's transitional because it's got partly human, it's partly ape. And then follow-on researchers came on, and within 5 years, they debunked every attribute as being either ape or human. And so what I did is, in conjunction with the authors of our book, Contested Bones, who listed every quote, relevant quote from all these follow-on papers that looked at the same fossils, and compared them to known apes and known humans and said, this part is ape, this part is human. We compiled that to make this map, and you could see the result. They put an ape skull with an ape jaw, with an ape forearm, and way down here, they added a human finger bone to it. So ape, 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 but then this human part, they've pretended like it belongs, this vertebra, they pretend like it belongs, but it was in a jumbled pit of...
So the scientist who published this initially said, I found a transitional form. One of those could go ape, could go human. And I know it's transitional because it has ape features and it has human features. But when he found the fossil, what he found was not like, some bone dude just like buried in the ground like this. What he actually found was a bone heap. We actually find these a lot when we're digging for fossils. One of the number one ways that things are fossilized, above all the other ways, it's the vast majority of fossils, is that a creature died in a flood. That is the vast majority of fossils. And the reason is, if you get buried in dirt, just normal dirt, or you don't get buried, you just die and lay on the ground. Like, that's how most animals go. Then you don't turn into a fossil. You rot. Your bones disintegrate. You turn into dirt yourself. There's no fossil of you. So the vast majority of fossils come from a thing that died in a flood. Usually a muddy flood.
Plot twist.
That's the number one way to die and become a fossil. So one of the ways, since Noah's flood, you get a lot of dead things in floods, is in bone pits from natural formations in the ground. So that would be like, it's pouring rain out, I see a cave. I will go take shelter in the cave. Ah, look, this cave will save me. And there's other people in there, and there's even some animals back there. Everyone knows, like, this is a bad one. And they're all hiding out in the cave. And a wall of mud water comes towards you. Oh no! And you run into the cave further. Everyone's running and screaming. And then the wall of mud comes in the cave and smooshes all of you back to the back of the cave. as far down and to the side and whichever direction the cave goes, you're gonna get pushed like ramrod in a cannon all the way into that cave. You and everything else that was in the flood, in the mud. And then you all turn into fossils. And you're just a big jumbled mess back there. Now what's weirder still is that we found evidence that this happens more than one time to the same cave. So you actually have, at the very back of some caves in these places that have this sort of monsoon weather where you get super dry spells during one part of the year and super rain during another part of the year, you find in the backs of caves bone piles. It's actually common. And fossils are down below the fresh ones. So you like go back there, dig in the mud, you'll find like bones from last year. And you keep going and you'll find fossilized bones from 5 years before that, because it turns out it doesn't take that many years to form fossils. It actually happens really quickly. And so when you go digging through the bone pits, you can find apes and humans and, I don't know, whatever else. All these other dead creatures. So then the problem becomes, how do you reassemble one guy's bones from the bone pile? How do you do it? I mean, you could be a specialist and study bones your whole life and you could still mess this up. Just having two human skeletons, as long as they're around the same age and the same height and the same gender, if you put all their bones in a pile and just went, and then said, now reconstruct them for me, it would be pretty hard. If they're modern bones, like the people just died like a week ago or something, you could tell from stuff like color, you could tell from nutrition, you could tell from all these like signs in the bones. Once those bones get fossilized and they're made of rock now, it's not as easy. Not as easy. So I don't know if you saw on the slide there, I'll see if I can back it up a second. The fossils themselves were not all the same color. Did anyone catch that?
Yeah.
Okay, now look at those bones as close as you can. Some of these are really reddish in spots. Some are very dark. Some of them are still quite light. These are actual photographs of the bones. And yet this is all rock. These aren't bones anymore. They're fossilized. They're legit rock now. They've been totally mineralized, where the minerals seep in place of the bone and take over the exact mold in the earth so that the bone is completely gone and it's all mineral now. And it doesn't always it's not always like full mineralization, and that's why there's bits missing. It's often the case that some of the bone doesn't mineralize and it just rots like normal bone rots. And so you get like half a rib. Happens all the time. But the point is, it's a total jumble of color. And I would forgive any scientist who messes this up. But the one who did this didn't mess up once, or twice, or 3 times. Most of their career has been spent creating transitional forms that turned out to be hoaxes. And I don't know if it's intentional. When you get all the bones out of a bone pit, you could do it by mistake every single time because it's just such a stinking hard job. But I don't know. I don't know if they're messing it up on purpose or they're just making mistakes. But when other specialists go through, they can look and say, you know what, this doesn't match this. There's no common thread between these that would make me put them on the same creature. And this isn't an apish, humanish arm where it's like a little bit apey and a little bit human-y. It's literally just an ape arm. It looks exactly like modern ape arms. There's no difference. And the same with, this piece of the backbone. It doesn't look slightly apey and slightly human-y. It looks precisely human-y, like anyone walking around here would have in their back. And you keep going through the list and it's every single bone. Every single bone has a distinct ape or human look to it. And what do you find when you go back in the bone pit and you look? A lot more ape bones and a lot more human bones. So this doesn't track. This isn't a transitional form. And the list is long. The list of things that scientists consider to be transitional forms is like probably 20 different species. But if you go through each of them, you either find never built buildings, never made tools, never did anything crafty like making jewelry, never performed surgery on each other, never made vehicles like boats or carts, lived in the bush, ate plants, only hunted their own kind. Or made boats, sailed across the ocean, made jewelry, did surgery on each other, intermingled with other human species. We actually find sometimes some of them are buried side by side like they were married holding each other's hands even though they're like supposedly different species. Like this is what we find. We find 100% they are apes or they were 100% human. They're just ancient human. We don't actually find anything that's legit what this was trying to be. Looks a little in between, looks a little apey for a human. We don't find any of those. The closest one I've seen is Lucy, and that was just a young person. And the fact that they were young when they died and got fossilized made them think, it's a tiny human. This is pre-human. Ah! It's like, actually, that's just sad because it was a kid.
Why does she look so weird? Like
'Cause-
her face is all.
Because she's a fossil.
So there's actually medical conditions called acromegaly people are born with, and their bodies develop too much growth hormone, and the growth plates form differently, and so when they die, and then they are buried, and then you exhume their skeletons, they look
Yeah.
Lucy.
Even
Like
just
people still have medical
arthritis.
conditions, you know.
Yeah, even just arthritis can
Yeah.
change the way your bones look after you're dead.
Yeah.
So just simple little conditions. Not to mention, some of these conditions are genetic. And so if you have an intermingling population of humans that live up in the snowlands, you know, up north in Europe, they're gonna all keep marrying each other's second cousin, because there's no one else up there. And so the genetic whatever that's making their skull this shape continues. It's not gonna magically go away. It's gonna get
And
stronger.
could you imagine, like, if some just, however long in the future, someone digs up Andre the Giant's skeleton?
And
They're
thinks,
gonna be like, that's a completely different species.
oh,
That's a
completely different species.
I mean, it's an
You guys ever seen Andre the Giant?
No.
He's in Princess Bride. You guys know
He's-
Princess
he's
I
Bride?
never
gorgeous.
seen
Oh,
Princess
yeah.
Bride.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, him.
You are the Brute Squad.
Yeah.
That guy. Yeah. So if someone dug up his bones, fossilized one day, and thought, oh, ancient humans look like this, it
Yeah.
would freak them out because that man is the wrong shape. He is just massive. And his skull
It's
is the wrong
huge.
shape. It looks like two human skulls got smooshed together.
Yeah.
And like he's the sweetest guy. I hope that doesn't sound offensive. I love him. He's just amazing. Go watch any of his old interviews. He's amazing. But yeah, he's not a good representation of what average humans look like. And to think that you could look at one skeleton
And generalize an entire.
generalize an entire population off of it is a huge blunder. And Lucy stayed perfect evidence. No one could question it until we found more of her kind. And it turns out, oh, she was a kid.
Yeah.
And she had this disorder. And the other ones who are like her aren't like her. They're normal. Oh.
Yeah.
And that's what we keep finding. The best hopes they have get dashed a few years later. Yeah.
So basically, what I was thinking with like the Lucy before you explained it was, she was like tiny, and what we were taught, yeah, English, was that she was like small.
Yeah.
And most like early human remains are like really like long arms, shorter bodies, like.
A weird generalization. It's not actually
very
true.
weird. Really?
No.
Huh.
The best we can figure is that ancient humans were shorter than us, but not by much.
Mm.
The averages for most populations in the thousands of years ancient past, probably 3 inches shorter than us, some maybe 6. We have found island populations that are way shorter. So we found pockets of humans that lived in one little environment and they never left and never crossbred with any other populations. And those sometimes can be much, much shorter. But that actually happens pretty frequently in the animal kingdom too. We see that if you take a population and you lock it up in a small space and you don't let people leave for whatever reason, be it fish locked up by ice movement or humans stuck on an island, that they tend to move in one genetic direction and it has momentum. It really moves in that direction. And it kind of makes sense if you're locked on an island, smallness is a higher probable we like it trait. You're gonna have better chance of, you know, marrying young and being the popular guy and doing all that stuff than if you're the incredibly tall one on the island. That sort of moves you in the other direction, puts you at the bottom of the dating pool.
The
So
other thing with height too is if you look at some pictures of your great-great-grandparents, they were smaller. And so stress and availability of food.
makes a huge difference.
Yeah, if you're super stressed out when you're young, your
Huge difference.
growth plates close up really quick.
Yeah, there's a
You stay
lot
short.
of misconceptions about ancient
Yeah.
people being small because genetically they were way
Right.
different than us. But modern day, if you go to North Korea and you go to South Korea, these populations only split off, you know, like less than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
You will find that the height difference between them is something like 8 inches. And it's worse in the women. And that is not because they're evolving at a rapid rate, it's because in North Korea they're starving to death. They're dying.
What about Africa?
Well, it's different. In Africa, it's not that they're not starving. Some people are starving in Africa. We don't have a clear-cut line in the border where everyone up here is starving and no one down here is starving. With North and South Korea, we have that. We have 2 populations that are only a few decades out from being the same population, right? You go back enough decades, they're the same population. And now they're separated by this wall, And you can see like an 8-inch difference between the women in the north and the women in the south, and it's all down to nutrition. They haven't had any time to evolve. They haven't had any time to really change their DNA. One of the other things that some of these scientists are finding out too is that epigenetics play a huge role in what we think of as evolution when we're studying animals or even bacteria. Epigenetics, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the concept. Anyone know what epigenetics are? No? Okay. So, you guys ever heard of junk DNA?
Kinda.
No? Oh, okay. So, your genome is so big that it would take up a whole library. It is so much information, and it's copied over and over again in every one of your cells in your body. But it's so much information. And as we went through it, we wanted to enumerate. We wanted to put like chapter marks in, almost like verse numbers in the Bible. So you could say, let's screen for this disease, check this part in their DNA, and it will tell us if they're going to have that disease. Does that make sense? So we wanted to know, what are all the chapters and verses? What do they do? What are the activities that the DNA is linked to? Are you going to be allergic to this fish? Are you going to be allergic to wheat? Like, let's find where the marker is in the DNA. So they went through and they mapped out the DNA of the human genome. They wanted to know where all the stuff is. And as they went, they were so gung-ho to get to the end that they kept on finding these patches that didn't do anything, as far as they knew. And they mark it as junk. They call it non-coding, or just junk in some cases, because it was coding and they couldn't even tell what it was doing. Most of it was non-coding DNA. Now, non-coding DNA means I'm watching the whole genome like a hawk, and I never see this section get taken into the replicator and used to turn into a protein. It never gets sent through and turned into a thing, a tool, a thing that the cell can work with. It never happens. It just sits there and sits there and sits there, and it doesn't matter what it says, it just sits there. So they decided that these huge swaths of the human genome were just junk, left over from past, species that we evolved from. Probably have some weird, wrench in there from the pufferfish and some old thing from, sea slugs, and we just don't need it anymore because we're not sea slugs. Well, time went on, and it turned out that all that non-coding DNA, it does do stuff. It just doesn't do the stuff they were looking for. A lot of it is error checking. I don't know if you guys are, any of you guys into computers? Anyone?
Going on my
computer sci guy?
Yeah.
Darn. Okay, well, there's a concept in computers called CRC. It's constant error correction. You're constantly correcting for errors, watching the data. I think our food might be here.
Really?
It's here.
It's here. Hi. Thank you.
I've been asked to enter a PIN number.
Oh, yeah. Your PIN is...
Yes. Everything.
We'll wrap this up and we'll pause for food. We'll do some games and stuff. Leaders, do you want to go start setting up? There's some cruditaw in the fridge. Get that out, move the laptops, move the magazines, all that stuff. You guys keep your attention here. They're going to set it up for us. So they're going through all the non-coding DNA, and what they start to find out is the non-coding DNA primarily has one very important job. If some of your DNA mutates in a way that would hurt you, there is other DNA down the line that doesn't make any proteins, but it instructs the mitochondria, it instructs all the inner workings of your cell, hey, don't let this part back there get mutated. If you let that part right there get mutated, it will wreck them. And your body reads that and goes, oh, okay, apparently that part's really important. And so it's messenger information to your cell so that you don't develop some weird anomaly, like an extra ear on the side of your head, so that you don't develop some extra anomaly, like an allergy to oxygen.
What?
These kinds of things are put into your DNA to double check your DNA so that no errors pop up that would absolutely wreck you. And the system works really well. It's why so few humans are born every year with a genetic abnormality that kills them. Now, some people are still born with a genetic abnormality that kills them, but the numbers are incredibly low. And evolution basically says that should not be the case. Evolution basically says that should be happening constantly in the quest for new versions of the species. Yeah.
So, in our science class, we watched a video on how, and it was basically like talking about like turtle eyes, which is a really weird subject, but it was talking about how genetic code that a genetic code that develops eyes,
Okay.
like on a turtle, basically
Yeah.
can be replicated from like I forget the animal, but they can take basically that gene.
It's almost not different.
Yeah.
Yes,
and
absolutely correct. This is an interesting point, and I think it's funny. What would you expect to be the case in either worldview? So either God creates everything or everything evolves, right? When everything evolves, everything's happening by random chance, correct? Would you expect everything to be shared between species if everything's happening from random chance?
I have no idea.
It's kind of an either or. It could go both ways. How about if one guy sat down and made an entire set of things? Would you expect those things to have similarities to each other? Does any of you guys do art? Is anyone here an artist of any kind? Pencil, paint,
She's good.
clay, whatever you work in.
She's good.
Okay. Could you, Victoria, since you've seen some of Elliot's art,
Yes.
could you, in a room full of two people's art, do you think you could pick out which ones were Elliot's and which ones are the other person's? Maybe you don't even know the other person, but you know Elliot's.
On their advanced
Their
skills.
style.
Okay, so like
And their
if their
style.
skills were
It really depends.
if their skills were on par with Elliot's, so they're about the same skill level,
Okay.
could you pick it apart based on her style?
It depends on the color.
Okay, so this is what I'm thinking. If God designed all the creatures that have eyes, why would he feel the need to start over on every creature and say, let's make up eyes again from scratch. We'll make up a brand new way to make an eye.
Well,
It doesn't make a lot of sense. Likewise, I can eat a banana and I can metabolize that banana just fine. I can turn that banana into usable energy for my body. And an ape can do it and a monkey can do it. And so lo and behold, what you find is the chemicals, the enzymes needed to break down a banana and use it for sustenance are the same enzymes. It's the same chemical that's in my body, that's in a monkey, that's in an ape. So then the question is, could you have different DNA make that enzyme?
No.
No, you can't. You can't. You have to have the same DNA to make the same protein, to make the same enzyme. You have to. So, unless God wanted us to be locked up in our own food supply, I can only eat pork, and he can only eat beef, and the monkeys can only eat bananas, and we can't touch each other's food, because if I eat a banana, I will die from not having the enzyme to break down potassium properly. If that was the case, then maybe God would make, our DNA fundamentally different, and we wouldn't share anything with apes, and we wouldn't share anything with monkeys. But if he wants us to be able to walk up and eat a banana, and they can walk up and eat a banana, and the monkey can crawl up and eat a banana, then yeah, he's going to give us the same DNA, because we all want to be able to eat the banana. As soon as you look outside of those realms, how do our bones form? What shape is our skeleton? What kind of food can we eat? And you look past that, it changes things. So here's how it changes things. You guys ever heard that DNA between apes and humans is 99% the same?
Oh yeah.
You guys have heard that stat before? Do you know that that stat is an outright lie?
Yeah.
They actually selected for the parts of the genome that they knew were going to come back the same. They selected for the parts of the genome that were for the shape of your skeleton, the fact that you can eat and process a banana. They went for the things like eyeballs. And they made sure to not look at the rest of the DNA because, again, some of it they thought was junk. They thought it didn't do anything.
junk DNA.
They didn't know what it did, so they didn't compare it between the apes and the humans. When you just do the whole genome, which is hard because, mine and Victoria's DNA are different, right? We have different DNA. So it'd be harder still to say, if every human has their own copy of DNA that's completely different, how do you even compare that to a chimp?
What?
Think about that for a second. Our DNA isn't 99% the same. Yours and mine isn't 99% the same. We're both humans. It'd be weird if mine and yours was 99% the same. Now, you and your dad, maybe,
50%.
right? Like you and your mom, maybe.
Yeah.
But like you and a stranger, you should not be 99% the same. And you're both human. So when you actually do an honest comparison between ape DNA and human DNA, it's 85% the same. 84? that's the real number. Why would they lie about that?
Why not?
All right, let's think on that, and we'll go eat some food. We'll do the last section after we eat. Go line up. We've got nuggets, we've got veg, we've got dips. I think there's like 5 of every kind of dip, so please do not take 2 of the same dip. Does that make sense? I know some of you love ranch. Don't take 2 ranch. You don't get a whole box of nuggets, I don't think. How many boxes do we have?
There's a lot of boxes, trust me. Oh, the Grimace's birthday.
I ordered them in 40 packs. They're 40 bucks.
The
40 nut boxes.
bean.
We probably have another box.
Probably.
There's
just so many nuggets. What the heck is that? You get 2? What? Who is Grimace? You get 2? What?
Oh, no.
You get 2 nuggets? Who's Grimace? Are we allowed to take 2 boxes? I need me that.
That's actually a huge problem. It doesn't just like food. The problem is, the life form of the city is
Abby, what are you doing?
is there any microscopic?
You are young.
No, usually single cells do. Single cells, inside the cell, they make an extra copy of this and an extra copy of this. And
But what if we can't have
and they zipper themselves in half.
What if?
They top of them 2 cells.
Yeah, same.
So at the single cell level, I get it. You don't need your own cell. But as soon as you go to
If you cut it really, really, really tiny, it's gonna be.
Whatever.
things, there's no deal. But right there at the microscopic level, how do you get a male and female out of a single cell organism? Doesn't make sense. Because what a male and female gets you in a single cell world, everyone's single cell. There's always germs.
I find myself going.
It gets you the need to find a need for it. So in a planet that's handled by single cell organisms, gender is like a downside. Oh, we're getting into that shed. Okay, so there's 2 reasons why that happens, and it's interesting. So one is mutations.
This is scary.
But the mutations.
Do you know bands yet?
Like, yeah, I guess what?
So, for instance,
Yeah. One of my friends from my dance group.
That's the one that
Any food when you're hungry tastes good. Especially chocolate. Yeah, I'm just gonna eat all of it.
Maria hates my food with like.
That's fine.
No, but it always says 5 minute walk.
No, my aunt says 10-second walk.
I just pick it up when I can. That's it. But then it leads to the Darwin because then it comes to the
It takes years for that to happen. It has to be a constant re-introduction to get bad things to happen. And it doesn't come from the actual ingenuity of someone close to you. It comes
When did I say that?
from stuff of mutation. They don't happen 10 in a generation.
Yep.
20 in a generation. They happen like 3 little flips in a chromosome per generation. And you've got like, what, 30 something chromosomes?
Just look at the color, like between a human,
Not human.
Or, extra.
Or, yeah, you have an extra.
the one, the MH2 on the bottom, look at like the, it looks like iron.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And as long as
And the other is like, there's like, because like, what if all the iron sunk into the Because then if it rusted with all the water coming from the mud, rusted, that then our bond
It's weird when they're checking your mom's first looks normal.
Oh, wait.
So you
That
can
is so
have an
weird.
average of 3 changes per generation. But in one case, it might be 6. In another case, it might be 0. They might actually get no music. All that to say, if you start with an original pair, them having kids, and those kids having to marry each other can go on and have their generation. How many mutations could they possibly have in their family line? 3.
That's presuming,
That's
too.
presuming that
And that's
mutations even occurred.
Right, because you gotta remember when God created Adam and Eve, they
So
were
in that-
perfect, right? They were perfect. Perfect.
I love me.
Yeah.
The most we have on Genesis
So bad.
is
That makes you
Woman, you need a lot.
It's not much.
So
To
I'm
get a
nice,
baby that's
that's
gonna,
enough of
like,
being
die
happy
after
for me anymore.
Sweet and sour sauce is not good. So when we actually see that happen, the reason we know that happens is we see it in male transplants.
How
Where
would
they're
it
doing
work?
it for
Happy
multiple
birthday.
With the single male donor.
The single,
Yeah.
that's the real problem.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's
So
I kind of
the single male
other
donor.
bad things we know about the
But you couldn't stand sitting next to him and
is
discern it?
older.
Are you serious?
When you get to be a really old guy,
I was next to
the
Danny.
teenager genes with your child is not the same quality. And so that's the other half, especially in those same royal bloodlines. It's some king who's like in his 80s still trying to have kids.
One of his great-great-granddaughter.
No, please cut that out. Like,
I think we all got the
that's
same
what
socks.
you get.
I think we all got the same socks.
The lung issues, heart issues. It's not just like one time, a family's been, bada bing, we're gonna get sick.
But he's not encouraging intermarriage.
No, I think there's plenty of other reasons you shouldn't do that.
Right.
Plenty of other reasons. I'm just saying,
Genetically
at
speaking.
least genetically looking at Adam and Eve, I think it's 100% possible for their kids to marry each other and no ill medical side effects. Because I think the science proves I know, I still love it either. I'm not saying I like it. I'm just
Weird.
saying, as far as babies being born with bad hearts, they're, does that make sense?
You know what else is really cool? You know that they didn't-
That's really, at that point, you're like genuine. You're not weighing how gross
Whatever
is
you're
this
getting.
versus, you know, anything else. It's like, what else do you pick? It's either we do this or humanity fails. Those are the options. Yeah, not my favorite, but
Yeah.
that's really, that's,
He does that a lot.
I'm not probably one to say that.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, this is cool about the museum. The reason why they kind of call it junking is actually most of the research or the headway they've made. I did a lot of paper on this.
Is Emma
Is
and,
cancer. Those genes are actually called proto-oncogenes, which were like only activated when the cell is told to just destroy itself. You generally don't read DNA of things that have already happened. And so they might say, oh, in the presence of this abnormal function, which is dangerous, we're going to activate this so it has this function disorder to kill
That was used to give me anxiety. That's probably because I see him all the time.
Like Louis?
Right, right. So not all proto-onco expressions are exactly the same, you know, because you've seen when it says, hey, kill this cell, it's cancer.
Then he just heals random things and it's like,
Let's say a colon cell is treating cancer, right? It's a different gene sequence.
I mean, I haven't seen that. I mean, so bad.
And that, yeah,
Of course, a lot of people think that's what you in the beginning.
right.
All of the time.
Yeah.
And the children of parents of babies.
How did you break both of them?
Right.
What is that?
Right.
And then I was like, oh, I didn't know.
Suggested that, hey, you should have a
that's over
baby.
20.
And the baby was born.
I know.
And the DNA
Well, we just got 2.
I mean, it's so, I know, I have no idea. My watch.
From age
But
of
what I would rather have them get over
And adaptation, iteration.
no,
It's like
14 times 2. 2 times 14. So
it's an allele like blue eyes.
it's
Humans. Yeah.
29. 28.
This
208.
might be this versus that.
I would rather
There's still extra.
there are epigenetics.
But what if he was supposed to,
Why not? If they did the
Maybe
paper,
order
there's
like
like more panels.
Well, you know what's
Because I think he just over ordered for
The one Daniel made us do.
and plus there's also children track for this, so
I got some
Duh.
really
Father's
cool
Day.
pictures on this, but
I
I
I was
Go down.
busy
I was
helping
like,
children.
That's like a
I
great
found a practical use case for
Lifeguarding. I don't like
God.
children. Do you lifeguard?
a suggestion of God disordering speech among people, right? And one
Yeah.
of them was, did you ever hear about that lady that was taken out with a bat? And then she had
What?
like T perfect. And they're actually starting to find that there's genetic links into the which affect neuromuscular expression, like your muscles work in your face, and speech patterns, like apraxia muscles in certain ways, they fire nerves based on the genes in your brain. So it's like, yeah, God did that. He actually figured out that.
my older
I'm
brother,
sure he's like, you're all gonna talk different now.
he's like,
Somebody accidentally activated that like
six
it's flying with a bat.
and he's only like 150 pounds.
A Scottish
He's like
heavy
fit.
Scottish accent. And then like.
So like he could easily downweight for me.
Fujianese, Chinese accent.
What do you think would win in a food battle nearby?
He went and showed you that. Oh, big one over here.
I just used some of my adult specials.
Depends on the day.
Yes.
Some days I'll get like, I don't want to eat a lot. Like 3 things. Like 3 nuggets and I'll be done. And then other days like I can eat like 10 of these. And still be hungry.
My mom will do what? It's turning on.
That's very, very, very noble of you, man.
You're not going to my country.
Wrong word.
Learn a lesson.
Yeah, you gotta understand That's awesome. At first you're like, you're kind of cringe watching because it sounds like she's mocking people. Right. And then you realize, no, she really.
What?
Yeah.
Danielle. Wait a minute.
Are any of the brother and sister in here?
There's
There's
Addie. Not Addie.
Oh, I don't want a daddy.
Oh yeah, but they're not.
Yeah, they're gonna come at 7 o'clock.
It's very,
So Dan.
Slide out.
No, I'm glad.
It's really weird.
When there was a party night, I'm glad you guys weren't there because I was like twerking. Like Danny started doing it.
How was it hot?
Oh man.
Is everybody?
Yeah. Some of the girls and some of the boys started dancing in the bar. I was psyched.
Or they can hit themselves. But it's just like another one of those practical
This one?
things.
I was talking
Biblical scripture. I already built these mechanisms in there. You can turn them on when you want.
Oh, that was definitely the one that does
Or what's the like iterations over time.
So I was with my brother at the time,
That's a
and we
whoa.
didn't go to the iceberg. And I was with my brother, and I was like, I'm on the verge of calling my parents and going home. Because like, it was that bad.
Did you ever see How did you know?
Right. Oh, we're done. They're almost interviewed.
But you got ketchup.
Why would it?
Why does ketchup always have to be in packets with the newspapers?
What?
Like, I didn't know. Sign up.
No, they still have a whole rotisserie chicken. No, it's on the other side.
You started this? No. My food. Are you figuring out why?
Oh, are you the spin more like fully or?
No, they were like half through the first spread and then.
How about Jim out? Then at his dad's.
Reproduction most of the time.
Right, which one impacts that? Right.
So you have the evolution of most of the
And Adam.
happens
shoot. No, no.
About damn it did.
Like I said it.
Most of the time it's not.
It doesn't make sense because we only got one person, and it only explains one style of DNA. But that's not the time. It's not like 1%
It's
DNA.
really fascinating to look at scientific exploration.
It's working.
Like,
CRU.
scientists you interact with or art of some faith.
I might be getting 110.
Absolutely. It's a reading thing.
Wait, you did it's not as big as
I think it's one.
And
still.
I
Decent size. It's only like 3 inches. That's my goal. Like faster than this.
right, like they create now questions they have to answer
This
for
is an
themselves.
85. Mine's a
And
110.
it's convoluted.
I wonder whose goes faster. His may be louder, but it's definitely faster.
I was about to say, how about the
Oh, yeah.
I thought this was. Can I go to your house one time?
Watched all that, created all the discovery, like galaxy, like right at the center of the stars.
Like, oh no, you won, like, absolutely. And
That was like
I thought I was gonna win.
7.
He doesn't know
Yeah,
what tiny little.
I remember.
I never met her.
Oh, crap.
I mean,
All I remember is going there.
Okay, send down.
What do you mean?
Well, they are just a little bit.
That's kind of weird.
That's not how that works.
Okay, where's the purple?
You've been gone 3 times.
Where's the black one?
Then effectively the white
Where's the black one?
creation is all.
So my stuff you know in the car, my makeup. I froze the little ice box and I just shoved it in the box. And so now it's cold. But nothing will freeze. It would just
I have a CRU.
I hope this helps to see.
like a circle.
Oh, yeah.
What was that sound?
I got the
Jordan! Your favorite. CRU is sudden death now.
I'm making soup.
Give it to Aiden!
Just imagine you're away.
Anybody have extra sauce?
Yeah, it's right here.
She does.
I believe you, sir.
The time between ship 1 and ship 2 is only death.
Say, how about dinner? Wait,
There's
wait,
another-
extra
No.
sauce? What sauce do you guys have?
Oh!
Oh, yeah, you can see
I need this.
Enough time to pull out the whole ocean.
I need
Space.
so
Ooh!
One ship a day away from me. You have to make the next ship, the next ship, the next ship, so you make all of them.
I felt bad to tell you how McDonald's not
This is still happening. If we're right about the
Hey, dude, I found the white one.
travels, the actual distance between us and England is now here. Longer than this creation.
Oh, yeah.
This is greater than from creation to terms, most likely. It's certainly longer than from creation. So that would mean none of the ships reaching England actually visited America.
The purple bean.
Nobody really chose ketchup because they don't want to eat
It's a
Do
little
you guys want some of my potion?
But
Yellow
then
no.
the whole problem is that means every.
Want some of my potion?
No, don't do
Mix a
that.
little flavor.
Why
Take
take
a
a
bite.
bite?
Mix a little flavor to it.
What is it?
No.
No, dude, it's mine.
Wait, try it. Somebody. Just dip your nuggets in it. Stick your nugget in it.
Dude, Danny, no, stop it. Danny, what the heck?
that really just happened.
My God, lady.
That's something else.
Yeah.
Ew, dog. Ew.
I gotta go to my children now.
Everything started out.
I'll see you after.
That's what I think. It makes sense to me. It's like, moment. Expanding.
My plan is ultimately fail.
There's not enough time. Yeah, it's not. It's old. It's old.
Don't say how. This is cold. It's cold. So whenever we have. Bye, Krista.
Okay, what? We're almost at Sunday. Wait, you're at Sunday.
What?
No, I'm at CRU.
Wait, what?
I'm at CRU. You just restart.
Okay, let's restart.
Oh yeah, great. Oh, you're talking about numbers and that many decimals.
Yeah, oh. Yeah, oh.
Christian.
We don't know how to
Do preferable
Molecular biology.
Youngster.
She doesn't want out.
What?
Get your hands out.
Micah, electronegativity. Things how things are attracted to
Micah,
bound together.
you're gonna die.
But then that doesn't translate into
How about them
cellular.
apples?
Like it just doesn't translate into sentience. Like purposeful,
Okay.
intentional. Like there's a has a
Micah.
you know, between the two.
Danny, you wanna play cry?
Danny's sleeping. What?
My sister has a lot of pictures.
One of the guys
I haven't been dating a video.
I'm scared of you.
Wait, no? You're watching a movie late at night?
Oh, yeah.
And you fell asleep right next to me and spent time
In my bubble.
So,
I don't remember that.
You shine a
Here.
light and the car rolls
Want it?
across. So there's this
You want it?
Yeah, a super
Micah, you want it?
just precise
I don't like red.
But the
Bro,
wheels
you're
are
what you
all
didn't have. No one wanted it.
and you're rotating.
Nobody loves you.
that's wild.
So this is Scott. And you start reaching
How many
out
did I see?
Oh, yeah.
into the cellular world of living things. And he's making micro machines to work on living things. So you need
I don't even
to know about
How they would interact, right?
but he's mostly inorganic.
Right.
And so he's learning all the organic chemistry and all of the biology and make his machines more useful.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Ew, what is that?
And as Chris said, he starts going across the
Clean that out. Clean that out. Ew. You monster. Just leaving that on the ground like that. Look it out.
That looks like a bird.
I don't know.
Don't
And
near.
one of those things
That was
when he sees his own work
Right.
done
What is
by
that? Wait,
It's like someone built this thing with a
Wait,
purpose.
what?
Right.
seeing these micro machines, he's like, wait a second. When I made this happen, I have to do this.
Actually, well, let's do let's just do
Can we do it over there or something?
Alright.
I'm kidding.
So,
Guys, I'm just gonna play Tom.
Oh.
Yes, right, because he tells us to create and have the meaning. It's like, and our brains are just little low resolution.
My
Yeah.
Parkour.
Okay.
Hi.
Amelia, are you playing?
Parkour.
I guess it's
No.
Well, if you
How's this
take
gonna
this
work?
and this
Amelia,
and
are
this
you
stuff,
playing?
You get a byproduct of this. And it's like, well, wait,
Alright.
what ratio is that?
Okay.
Here is the byproduct.
Yes.
Here's the
and I
byproduct.
played soccer.
All
And I
left-handed.
Do
So
it.
some of it really right-handed.
Right.
And it will never interface with any organic.
Or swim in a circle forever and die. Yeah.
Danny, we're playing tongues. Playing tongues.
All life you've ever
It's
found
like
is
spoons,
rock.
but instead you stick your tongue out.
It's all left-handed.
It's a lot harder. It's how I last.
And when you do it,
Whatever, who cares?
That's not how you.
I'm doing the GA.
And I said I got away.
Your
grandfather was an
in the process.
Ooh, no.
Not
And you
not
start
Okay,
not
slap down.
1 second, people.
Right.
Let me take a bite of my
Doesn't mean he's gonna take it.
That was on the floor.
Yeah.
Every time he's on the farm.
Oh,
What
happened on that?
Why don't you use
Right.
No, you're like,
step one in step two? And see what happens.
So what?
Slap a dab up.
You start with step one and you get 20% of what you want, you go to step two. Now you have 20% jump and 20% of what you want, and that you get to.
No, Micah, you don't drop it anymore.
Just to make sure it's right.
What
Yeah.
did I do?
And it's only like
Never mind.
100 steps to get to a single step.
Well, he wants
Let's
more.
go.
So you have it.
Yeah.
Do I put it in that one? I don't know.
Absolutely nothing.
Give me a second.
I never met
It's only the ingredients you started with. It's not even just as purified, it's just there's no contaminant, nothing else going on. No, there
There's
is.
no other life.
You got my other one?
Stockpile of thing.
I don't need
Stockpile
this.
of thing that it needs. Look at that, they react to each other. Duh, they react to each other. So he keeps going through and finding all these little problems like the chiropractor.
No.
Asking the guys who are doing research and like, oh, no, no.
Why do I keep eating the same seven?
Explain to me
Oh my gosh, why are you gonna have
no
hair?
conversation, they don't talk.
Yeah.
And so no one who's actually.
Why would you do something so creepy? You're all like,
Serious? No, pull from this.
Right.
They're doing
No,
it
I'm pulling from that.
together, writing their book. And typically the work things in their summaries. Some magazines.
Right. We have it all the time.
These nothing burger ones, they
Yeah.
just are
I just need it.
absolutely
I need it so
Worse
bad.
and
It's
worse as
like,
time goes
and the
on.
titles and the summaries are being written just.
what? I did.
I even put it down as hard as I could. Everyone looked at me.
Wait, did you have it, Micah?
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh my God, fun.
Summary.
No, that was it came back around. I was
Nice
supposed to
We're
be
doing
doing
elimination?
Yeah, I know. When it came back around, I was like, yeah, I take.
Grab them again?
You're in
Grandma and an uncle.
You don't know.
There's a card in. You
No! No!
No, they're just like creepily good friends. They're like really good friends in a creepy way.
Same.
Well, that's because it's the end of the day, like, all
Oh,
the
you guys are
Travis looked at me like,
I thought they were talking about you guys. Wait, are you the girl or not?
no!
I've
That's
never
a
been
moral
here.
point. And you had to decide, agree that that represented
Think about it.
and that's a
I can't
subjective
tell the
question.
difference.
I
She,
would
no, I don't remember the other
You put a number
Ava.
and
The
you
other
have to
Ava
do
looks so
anything
much different.
scientific.
I don't know what the
Y'all are
other
making
Ava
some
looks like.
subjective
Yes,
I'm sorry, I'm
We
sorry.
can
She
say
looks
that this is
other,
one.
like,
And
completely different.
I've led my stock into this, which seems to make more sense to me. Yours is
She made me watch it.
millions of lines and all that. Like, that's,
Yeah.
and that's really what it comes down to.
Okay, you know what, man? I'm gonna.
why are we throwing shoes now? We always throw shoes. And he's usually the one who starts it.
What free buy?
There's a shoe.
Oh, the bullet turns into
I'm not a bully. I just have no other people to bully me besides you. This is my first time.
What?
Right, Ansel? I'm not 18.
No, these are like your 40s.
Oh, I made it work like this.
You know, you can put on cards there.
Yeah, good job. Honestly, I'm a little nervous.
About your life? This isn't your. What? No, that sounds exactly. No, stop. I need more. Oh, it's probably a shirt tag.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad, yay.
That's what it is. I'll put in the document.
Listen, dude.
Oh my goodness. Straight set.
Oh, let's go.
I'm selective about what I.
Crap.
Okay, ready?
And at the end of the day, it's like,
I have hard to down.
simply with.
Wait,
the
but like,
plain
what's it
language,
used for?
assessor, right? Nature.
Because when I pick up another car, it's gonna go to 4, then I'm gonna go to 3, then I'm gonna pick up another car, it's gonna go to 4.
We all fucking
No, you're supposed to
that's.
Eating yourself.
Why do you have 6 cards in your hand?
Because I heard.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially when you're on.
You don't hate women. Wait till you go. No, she might have. How do you know?
Why are we talking about
How do you know? Did you grow
Oh, yeah,
up? I am.
Come on, I need to walk back. What?
She smells like a queen. I don't want a queen.
Well, that's like I was want a king. I don't want your cancel your out.
You
I'm going to eliminate.
Now we are.
Wait, are we playing tongues?
Yeah.
Did we not clarify that?
Yeah.
This
We clarified
do not
that.
apply here. Like, there's no way.
I thought I saw something.
And I made different choices. I
My
couldn't
bad.
make.
From the trunk.
Another 8. Another 5. Another 8. Another.
I have another 8.
I have another 8. That would just shear you. It's a massive strength. Like, it's gonna shoot.
I tried.
With abrasions, like, come on. Like,
You
come
gotta
on.
be
I'm
kidding
sorry.
me.
Like, you just.
What the heck?
Science me that there.
Another jack. Another 9.
And it's like, how much? At what point does game? And that's my. What point does tonight become a game?
You're out. No, he said it's
No.
So it didn't even matter if I took my turn out because
You're late.
Sure.
Where's Alan? Oh, right.
Come and play with us, friend. Is Alan dead?
Oh!
No, he's at high school. Doesn't make
It's
sense.
like the only requirements is.
That's what he told me.
Why is Alan at high school camp?
Because our parents are cooking.
Oh.
Hey, you can play with us. Your only requirement is that you have a tongue. 3.
Will he be able to come next
I have
time?
one of those. What's up?
1.
Will Alan be able to come next time?
Probably.
Those people
We'll
are
try
losers
that
and they
to
don't
get.
have Addie's here. Addie! And she brought me eggs. Where's your sister? She is asleep.
Did you take this as an encounter?
What?
Yeah, I forgot to use that. Oh, you stolen? Okay, yeah.
What's that code for that?
For the chef?
Yes.
I'm very
Thank you.
I'm a very busy
Do you know the church?
Don't. I thought it was 4 something 7.
Close. So if you have 3 items, look at the last 4.
Okay.
I think we would be the 2 though.
Got it.
Can I show
Nose goes.
But wait, it's not in there.
You're a loser.
It's right here.
Oh, I thought it was in the chef.
No.
You needed to do nose goes just to prove that?
You're a loser. You don't.
Wait, his name should be
And
Lucas.
I don't think you'll all see it. So we should all be in there.
What? What?
What?
What I do now?
What?
Wait. What? Yes. Let's go.
Alrighty, guys, let's do a wrap up real quick.
We're gonna do all out.
We're playing all out. We're playing all out.
We're gonna do
Yeah, in a minute.
Yay!
We're playing all out.
Alrighty, guys, we're gonna do a wrap up. Come find us seats. We're gonna finish up here.
He hurt me. You almost called me what, Alan?
Yeah, but I didn't.
Why?
Obviously my.
Is there certain then you be sitting here?
Come find a seat, guys. Come find a seat.
What about microwaves?
Microwaves are hot.
Does not say microwaves.
I mean,
Space age technology. What could be hotter?
Small evolution.
You guys don't get the joke.
What's the last question?
I didn't.
It's the last one.
I didn't hear.
I thought you said it. Didn't you say microwaves are hot?
No. I
Oh, she said it? Oh, okay.
said they
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. No, that's the whole point is they get hot quickly. That's why we switched to them. You should just be ovens all the way.
Let's do this
Alrighty.
all out and get on our.
Let's get on with our lives.
Everybody don't ask questions. No, I'm guarding.
Alright, one of the things I want you guys to learn about is epigenetics. Before we break, epigenetics is code that's in your genes. It doesn't get used most of the time. Most of the time. It just sits there, silent, doesn't do anything. And when your body detects literal environment tracking, it's watching your environment, it detects a change in your environment, your cells all get sent a trigger, and it tells them, hey, go check that piece of DNA you've been holding on to for a rainy day. Go read it. I need you to do that. Now, this material has been found, epigenetic material has been found in basically every organism on the planet. And what we're starting to find out is some of the things we looked at previously, and scientists told us were adaptations, that these changes were being seen in creatures over generations because they were adapting to their environment through mutation, through evolving. Turns out it was just baked into the creature. Let's stop and think about that for a second. Some scientists said these changes were happening over time because the creatures were evolving, so mutations and then selection by natural selection. However, what we're finding is almost all of these are changes because the DNA inside the creature was designed to detect the change in the environment and had a pre-recorded response for that change. And then the animal acts on that pre-recorded response. Its body does automatically. So here's an example. You guys are familiar with Darwin's finches, yeah? His famous finches. No, he goes to the Galapagos? No? Okay, so Darwin had this theory of evolution, and he goes and he travels the world because he wants to see the animals firsthand. He wants to see the plants firsthand that are outside of his normal environment. You know, he's not up there in Northern Europe. He wants to go all over the world. So he ends up at the Galapagos, some tropical islands, and he's studying the creatures on the Galapagos, and he notices that finches have beaks of a certain shape. And he stays there for a while, and he watches, and as the food supply changes, he notices that the finches' beaks change too. But it's like over long periods of time, long periods of time. And so he says this is evolution at work. That if a finch has a beak suited for really tough, sturdy shell nuts, it's going to have that big, hard, thick-walled beak that can just crack through a tough nut. Or if it's a bug year, and bugs are the primary food source, then the birds with the skinny little grab you out of the air beak, they're going to get more food, they're going to live better, they're going to have more babies. And so depending on the food supply, that kind of bird is going to have more babies, and therefore they all evolve in that direction because there's more babies coming from the healthier birds. That was his theory. And he watched and he saw as the food supply changed, as the seasons changed, the birds being born were different. And he's like, see, I was right. The problem is Darwin didn't control the population. He's just watching wild birds on an island. He's not over there in the nests, tracking to see this mother, this baby, this mother, this baby. We've now done that. Because his Galapagos finches were so famous, people actually went and studied the finches even more. And what we found out was big, fat-beaked finches could give birth to a little skinny-beaked baby 1 generation later. No time for evolution to occur. It's just 1 generation. And then when you compare the DNA between the two birds, with a fat beak and a little skinny bug-catching beak, they have the same DNA. Think through that for a second. The mom has a big fat beak with the same beak DNA as the baby with the little skinny beak. The same beak DNA. And the reason is, now we've looked at their genomes, they have the skinny beak DNA and the fat beak DNA all of the time. They are never missing either piece. And when the mom is making an egg, she is fully aware of the food supply. And she can actually chemically signal to the developing egg, it's bug season, you really need that skinny beak. And the baby will grow a skinny beak because the chemical markers were put in the egg by the mom. Now what this means is interesting. It means the trait didn't evolve. Does that make sense? Skinny beak, fat beak doesn't evolve. Both the skinny beak and the fat beak pre-existed in the creature, and it's choosing a skinny or a fat right at birth, well, during development in the egg. It's choosing based on what the mom told it chemically. So this skinny beak and fat beak DNA was in there both at the same time. Well, then how did it get there? Because what we're being told by evolution is it evolves through random chance. It evolves through random chance. So you have to accidentally get born with a skinny beak. And then it just benefits you because it's a buggy year. It's not a nut-filled year. It's all bugs. And so you just are healthier and you have more babies because you just happen to be born with a skinny beak. The problem is that doesn't match the data. You don't have accidental birth traits for beak size in the finches. You have precision-chosen beak sizes based on the food that's out there in the world before they're born. They've never looked at the world, but their bodies are developing the precise beak they need for after they're born. So this is epigenetics, and we find it all the way down on the cellular level. We actually see some single-celled organisms whose epigenetics allow them to change their bodies without going into a new generation, without having kids. They can literally access different parts of their genome while they're still alive. And they can just start doing things differently. So not mutation, natural selection, but rather pre-known ways to adapt that were coded in their DNA in advance. Does that make sense? So here's the final question. Ladies, try and hear this one at least.
I'm scared.
Try. Ladies. Think of all the things that scientists say evolution is proven by, and then go through it with me in your head one by one. The fossil record doesn't show slow change over time from one species to another. It doesn't show that. It shows all the different species coming up simultaneously. And when you find the same species in multiple layers, which we do, they aren't different. They're the same. It also shows that the different adaptations that creatures can have over time tend to be preordained in their DNA, not randomly mutated into existence. I'll add one that wasn't in any of our videos. The mutations that we do track, the mutations that we do find in our DNA, tend to have little to no consequence. And anytime they have a consequence, it's a negative consequence. So we see positive traits coming from pre-written knowledge, and we see negative traits coming from mutation. We see the fossil record gets rid of the long timeline. The fossil record actually says it was a short timeline. What is there left that actually pushes in evolution's direction? What other evidences are there left that actually make evolution sound like a good answer? What else is there? Can you guys think of anything else? If we don't have the DNA, if we don't have adaptation, if we don't have the fossil record, what is there? I'll give you the answer if you guys want it. You guys want the answer?
Yes.
It's faith that there isn't a God. That's it. That's the only evidence left. It's faith. Some people have faith that there is no God. They're certain of it. So there has to be a way for all of what we see to occur, right? It couldn't just be that we all were born yesterday with the memories of everything that came before, right? We have to come up with some explanation for how this all got here. And if we're preconceived with that notion, there is no God, then almost any answer sounds like a good answer. Yeah, Abby.
Oh, so basically schools kind of like they teach us about evolution and they teach us like blah 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 because that's like the curriculum when they're trying to like really just like gaslighting us into thinking.
A little bit, but I don't want to blame every teacher. You know, most people who teach this stuff, they believe it. Mm-hmm. They think they're teaching you the truth. And I would say I got a lot out of my secular textbooks, but I had to understand what was the evidence they were showing me. I could believe the evidence. I could believe what we dug up. And then I had to also understand what was the interpretation they were providing me. So what was the actual ground truth? We found this fossil. It was buried like this. That's a ground truth. I can trust that. I mean, I don't think they're lying most of the time when they talk about that stuff. I'm pretty sure they're telling the truth. Some of them do. They concoct fake skeletons out of mixed up skeletons. But I don't think that's the majority. Those are one or two individuals. So I trust the ground truth, and then I just say, well, what's the interpretation they're providing me? And then I have to find, is the interpretation based on the evidence, or is it based on their preconceived faith that there is no God? Because if that's the case, then they're exactly as right as me, who interprets the evidence based on the preconceived notion that I believe there is a God. They have no leg up on me. They're not ahead of me in any way. And they can say, hey, you only think that way because you believe in God. And I can say, you're right. And you only think that way because you believe there is no God. But I also used to not think that evolution was false. I used to, especially in middle school, I thought evolution was 100% true. I also thought the Bible was true. And I tried to square them. I tried to mash the two together. The classical, everything evolved from common descent to God created everything. And so I came up with my own theories. I invented my own. I basically decided, God made everything. He kicked it off. He said, go evolve. And then it evolved into us. And when he got to us, he's like, finally, I've been waiting for you guys. He's like, I got plans for you. And I made up this whole theory on my own, but the problem is, it's not true. The Bible goes completely against it, and this is the worst part, the evidence goes completely against it. We don't have evidence of millions of years of evolution. So there's no onus to believe it. No one needs to believe it. So yeah, don't feel ashamed for standing up for the truth, but also know when you're trying to tell a teacher in a school, I don't believe what you're teaching me, you're telling someone who believes that fully, and they don't think they're lying to you. So make sure you address it that way. If you address a person who believes what they're telling you as a liar, you will only offend them, and you won't win them over. So definitely treat it like you would another religion. Like if you're talking to a Mormon kid, or if you're talking to a Buddhist, or if you're talking to a Muslim kid, like talk to them like that. Lovingly introduce them to the truth and pray for them. Don't treat them like a liar, because most of them aren't. Most of them honestly believe everything they're telling you. Yeah.
If I so we're learning about evolution, and I don't do any of the work, and I get a bad grade, is that okay?
That's a really good question. I would actually talk to your teacher a little bit, but I would do the work you're given. What I would do in that exact scenario might not be what you should do. So don't take this as the exact advice you should follow, but here's what I would do. I would tell my teacher I don't believe this stuff, but I'm gonna do the work he assigns me. And I would put, as well as the correct answer, corrections. But I would also have to wait and see what my teacher does with that. Because you might do that and one teacher thinks it's hilarious and they play the game with you. And then they'll have an ongoing debate with you, like, okay, what about this, Danny? And they'll try and stump you, and then you gotta go home and do your research, and it's like extra homework now. So you might get that response. You might also get the angry person response, where it's just like, I hate that kids are challenging me, F. And you just get an F from now on. So I don't want you to take what I say and just do it and say, Daniel, you got me an F. Talk to your teacher. You could probably gauge on the first conversation how it would go. Some teachers are gonna be like, interesting, tell me more. Other teachers will just demean you in front of everyone. Be like, look at Danny, he's dumb. And yeah, I wouldn't take the time to convince that teacher. I don't think you're gonna get anywhere with that guy. But at least talk to them, maybe open the conversation, and then yeah, if you see some blatant disregard of the evidence in the quiz, in the material, highlight that jazz. Show him, I checked it out, that's wrong. That's not real. They're lying about this. One of the number one lies you'll see in textbooks, number one, is the illustrations, the hand-drawn bits are fudged. They're messed with so that they match what they want them to match. And they'll do the illustrations when they know the photograph would disprove their theory. So one of the ones you'll see, some textbooks, I don't know your guys' textbooks, is the pictures of ape skulls, caveman skulls, and human skulls. They'll put them up side by side, and they're all hand-drawn. And they'll show you that ape skulls look this way, caveman skulls are like 50-50 between apes and humans. But the truth is, if you look at the photographs, they don't work like that. If you look at the photographs, all the caveman skulls, they look human. It's only in the hand drawings that they can mess with that stuff, and it looks believable. All right, anything else before we close?
No.
Any other questions? You guys can always hit me up one-on-one. If you think of it next week, you can ask me next week. I don't care. I love this stuff. I got tons more of this than I showed you.
It feels like it's like this is ending church, but really church is.
I know. We're about to start. We're about to go play a game and get church started. Okay, so that's it for evolution. Like I said, if you guys have more questions, please talk. Please talk to your parents more about this afterwards. We are now going to go into cleanup mode and then game time. So if you see trash on the floor, throw it away. I'm going to turn the lights on.
Danny. Oh, look at them.
Could you guys throw away all your Kindergarten trash?
I'm smart. What happened to my alligator? Show me that. So next week.